started. This is pretty much a class on not just kind of like general archery, but as a way of understanding how to correct or adjust for archery issues. It's also a good way for beginning people or for people to teach beginning archers. This is what you need to do to kind of understand why you're shooting the way that you are and things like that. And that's, if you are able to do that already, that's great. Maybe this might help with some interesting tricks or things that might be a different way of teaching or instructing that other people be like, oh, okay, I get it. Which I know for me, that helps out a lot, because several times it's like I could tell someone something and they're just not getting it. And then I say it a different way and they're still not getting it. And I'm like, hold on, let me bring someone else over here. Maybe they can explain it better. And then they get it at that point or something like that. So, so how long have you been doing archery?
6 years now.
Cool. I've been doing
6 years sounds about right.
I've been doing it for 31 years.
You got me by a few.
I actually started teaching shooting sports for the Boy Scouts. So that helped out a lot. But then I also became an infantry officer for the United States Army. So they also helped me to understand how to shoot. And a lot of the same stuff that has to do with rifles also has to do with bows. So it works out quite well. One of the things that I like to talk about first is when people start to shoot, there's a lot of people that will start to shoot and they immediately go, oh, well, I shot high, so I need to shoot a little bit lower for my next arrow. And then all of a sudden that arrow is really low and they're like, oh, I overcompensated. So then they overcompensate again. And I always tell people, never adjust from the last arrow you shot. You always adjust from the grouping that you have on the target. And I always tell everyone, when you want to shoot, you shoot 6 arrows at the exact same spot. And then wherever the 3 or 4 groupings of arrows that is in about the shape of a tennis ball, that is where your target is. And you need to adjust from that grouping, not from an individual target. When you instruct other people, what are some major things that you see that are, I want to say common, but a lot of major errors that you see from people, or how other people instruct people that you're like, no, that's actually not the right way to do
it? Usually when I'm teaching, the first thing I'll do is tell the students that the thing I'm worried about first is their form and their technique, and not to worry about where they're hitting. And that as they refine their form and their technique, what's going to happen is that they will naturally start to form groups. And it isn't until they start to get those natural groups that I'll worry about anything other than their form and their technique. Once we've got them grouping, then we can start to look at, all right, well, how are you aiming, and how can we get you closer to the center of the target? Because a lot of, like you said, archers they'll do something and then they'll think, oh, I need to adjust, and they adjust based upon one arrow, and they don't know what they did wrong on the first arrow, so they do something completely different on the second arrow. And you watch the shoulder go up, or you watch the hand move, or you watch them flinch away from the arrow when they make the release. So I try to get them to focus upon the technique and the form so that they get a level of consistency. They start to form the groups naturally, and then we start to worry about the aim. And also bring the target closer, like shoot from 10 yards instead of 20, because shooting at 20, they start to get frustrated very quickly that, hey, I'm not on the target. It's like, well, we're we're worrying about the wrong thing right now. Right now, we're just going to worry about getting your form right. Let's bring the target up close so you can't miss. Then we'll work on grouping, and then we'll start worrying about how to aim at longer distances.
Yeah, I agree with almost all of that. I always tell people when you shoot an arrow, you're just shooting one arrow. You're not thinking about the other five or the one you shot before or the one that you're going to shoot next. None of that comes into play because you're just worried about getting your form right again, getting back into the correct placement, getting the correct release just on that one arrow. If you think about, oh man, that last arrow, I totally screwed up. I did this and this. You're not even thinking about the arrow you're shooting now. You're still thinking about the errors from before, and you're going to cause more errors. And it's like, oh man, I'm doing really good. I really better not screw up the next arrow. Stop thinking about the next arrow. Think about the one arrow that you're shooting. Keep your form right. Get your stance right. I totally agree. The one thing that I have seen is I'm actually more of a person who doesn't believe in shooting at the 10-meter target because the 10-meter target gives a false sense of shooting to me because when at the 20 and the 30, which pretty much is where a lot of the poundage really comes into play and kind of has a nice balance. When you're shooting at the 10, at least for me, the arrows are always going to go up. So you're really shooting really low because the arrows are going to start going on a higher trajectory right away. And it's, to me, I've seen more problems, but that's, like I said, that's the way that when I teach, I'm not a big fan of it. But anyone who's shooting a 20-pound bow or less, I will definitely say, yes, you need to shoot at the 10-meter target because your arrows are not going to be consistent enough at the 20 because of the lower poundage. But
right, and that's a significant part of it, specifically since we're teaching a lot of kids or younger archers with lighter poundage bows, where I don't want them to get frustrated. I will definitely focus upon closer ranges to get them on the target so they feel good about their archery. And then worry about getting them to how do we get to the longer distances, because as their form tightens up, they'll get better at the longer distances. And it's not that I spend a lot of time on the 10-yard necessarily. It's that I actually will deliberately change it up to put them at different distances to demonstrate how you have to adjust your aim for high and low, and to get them used to what it feels like posture-wise to shoot at close range at 20 yards at longer distances, so that they're getting the form ideas down in their head, and then when we start adjusting the distances, they know what to do.
I started my kids shooting below the age of 10, and I think a lot of people who like to shoot, the younger you start, the more you're going to get rid of the bad habits quicker, because you're trying to teach someone who's like 38 who's never shot before, okay, you need to do this. It's amazing how a 38-year-old can react like a 12-year-old. I just don't understand. It's like, you got to relax. This is a very Zen type of thing. And the more you get frustrated, the more your arrows are going to go all over the place. And you're just going to keep on getting more and more frustrated about it. So
right, and if you get frustrated, stop.
Exactly.
Because if you're getting frustrated, you're going to get sloppy. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to get more frustrated, and you're not going to improve. You asked one of the things that I see commonly is, I shoot fairly quickly. My Baron shoots fairly quickly, and I have to remind my beginners, like, look, slow down, take your time, aim the shot. Don't shoot until you feel like you've got the shot. Don't hold it forever, but don't just draw it back and loose, because then you don't know what you did.
Right.
Draw it back, take the time to aim the shot, loose the arrow deliberately.
I know several people who can go and bring it straight back, and as soon as they get into that position, they immediately release. And they're like that every single time. And I'm like, wow, that is great. Yep. That you're able to, I call it kind of like shooting at a horse bow, because you're there and you're gone.
Yep.
they're really good at the 20-meter target, even the 30-meter target. At the 40-meter target, they get to be a little bit less accurate because the trajectory and everything really can adjust. And of course, whenever there's wind or any outside issues, people also don't understand. It's like, man, I was shooting great yesterday. Why am I not shooting great today? Well, because yesterday was 30% humidity and today is 92% humidity. You don't understand that your bow is going to change, your arrows are going to change. It's like shooting through soup. You're going to have to adjust 1.5 circles up more because you're going through denser air. So having to know the mathematics involved too really comes into play on how to adjust and correct for stuff. Instead of like, this is always working. I don't know why it's not working. Because of this or because of this. Even like shooting different forms. So if you just have like a straight target is one thing, but if you have a paper target that's behind cardboard, that's behind hay bales, hey, I'm shooting and my arrows are going right through the targets and going into the hay bales. Well, that's different than if you're using a much more solid, like compact foam, where the arrows are only going in this far. Your fletchings are not being disrupted like they would going through a bale, because now you're getting deformations and scratches and everything like that in arrows that people don't, oh, why should that make a big difference? Because if your fletchings get compressed or a little bit ripped, it's going to create a wobble, and that's going to change it up to about a 2 to 3 inch variant. And then if you're trying to shoot 6 arrows and one arrow is a really crappy arrow, because we've all had those where all of a sudden it twists or it bends or part of the fletching's gone, that thing just goes all over the place, and you're like, oh, I'm shooting this thing and this thing is just going to be terrible. It's like, that's why you need more than just 6 arrows to swap it out and everything like that. So people don't realize, well, I've been shooting these. Maybe you should try some different arrows. And then they try newer arrows and they're like, wow, these things are much more accurate. All these little things can have an effect. So
absolutely.
When you aim and stuff like that, do you do what's known as a natural respiratory pause when you shoot?
I don't know that I'm conscious of it anymore, but you mentioned earlier in the video that some of the skills that you leverage over from other disciplines, like rifle shooting. And I did learn rifle shooting when I was in the service. So some of those skills about controlling your breathing and being consistent about when you're taking the shot during your breath cycle do apply to what I'm doing with archery, unless I'm on a speed round or something. But generally, yes, I do find that breathing is part of the technique, although it's not usually the first thing I talk about with beginners. It's something that it's more like when we get to the point where we start to like worry about aiming, then we can start talking about the finer points of, you know, what you're doing with your breath, what you're doing with your expansion and things like that.
One of the things that I do is when I, as part of my main goal is to essentially get them to the natural respiratory pause. And I say part of the thing that happens with that is, besides stance and form, is everything that has to do with breathing, grip, release, because each one of those will have a different effect. So when you can have a nice stance, and then when you can breathe correctly, and your release is fine, and when after you release, you keep your form so your grip is not twisting or anything like that. So I try and put it into, these are the things that occur, and this is how you can, in one complete motion, fix a lot of these problems. So one of the things that I tell a lot of people is when they're shooting and they get uh, 6 arrows and they're almost going completely straight up and down.
Mm-hmm.
what do you tell your people that that's the issue? What issue is for that?
Yeah, well, with what you just demonstrated, that looks a lot like breathing, because there is that breath, the breath in, the breath out, and that's going to change your point of aim.
Exactly. That's what I tell everyone, because it's like when you're in the stance and you're breathing, you're like, so if you're not having a nice breathing form, or a natural, as I say, a natural pause in it, every time, if you're inhaling and then you release, your arrow is going to be going up. If you're going to be exhaling, you're like, ah, and then as soon as you release, you're like there, and then it's going to go below. So I tell everyone exactly the same thing. If you have a series of arrows that are just going straight north and south, off to the side, or a little bit at an angle, that's a breathing issue. And that's, yeah. So at that point, it's like, no, you're doing really good. Well, I don't understand. It's breathing. You're like, inhale, da, 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 da. And that's how it goes, because, and I relate it to in the military, when you're shooting, when you start shooting, you actually are supposed to shoot actually high, because as you're shooting, you're actually breathing out, and so they teach you to breathe in, shoot, and then breathe out, because at that point it pretty much goes across the body. I know that sounds like a weird thing to tell people, but it's a natural physical action. All right, how about this? Say someone's aiming directly at the center of the target, and they get this pattern. So it's to the left. Man, can't do my fingers really well. So here's the center, here's the right. When you're looking at it, here's the right side and here's the left. And you see a lot of shots kind of to the left that go from kind of high and kind of curve in an angle.
Well, my first culprit would be their release, what they're doing with their release hand. But that kind of I'm presuming that we're assuming a right-handed archer shooting with, right hand on the arrow, left hand on the bow.
Right.
And if their hand is, are they, what kind of release are they doing? Are they doing a dead release, or are they doing an open release? Are they flinching with their hand open, jerking their hand open? Are they coming straight back off of the string? And also what they're doing with the bow. I mean, are they doing what you said with like the continuous aim, or once they like shoot the arrow, where does the bow go? Where does the bow hand go? And so I'm usually looking at the bow hand and the string hand to figure out why they're going left and right.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
So yeah, what I say is, anytime that someone is shooting, and after they shoot, you can always see the arrow go towards the left.
Yeah.
People are always thinking, well, somehow am I angling the thing? It's like, you're not angling the bow. What a lot of people do is that they grip the bow so much that as soon as they release, they do a quick little jaunt. Or what some people do is that they, when they grip it, they have what's known as a wrist, not a wrist flick, but a twist grip. So they're holding onto it so much that sometimes you'll see people shoot like this, and then when I watch them from behind, they're actually shooting way off to the right because they already know that once they release, they automatically know that they're going to be either turning the bow up or turning it to the side.
Right.
So, yeah, to me, I've always seen that when this happens, that's when you get this curve. If you see a whole bunch of stuff to the left, it's been mostly the release and the jarring of the bow to the side. So I always tell people that when you're actually shooting, you actually don't grip it. You keep your fingers open. You can bend this one a little bit, or you can keep it as an aiming tool. But then when you release it, it automatically comes down and you're just grabbing the bow. You're not actually shifting the position of the bow from the point of release. You're just stopping it from falling forward compared to angling to the side.
And that's one of the things that I teach is, one, to tell them don't death grip the bow. All the tension that they have in their hand is going to go into the bow. All the tension in the bow is going to go into your hand. And I demonstrate, with an open hand, showing them I can draw the string completely back, and I don't need to hold the bow to keep the arrow on the string. It's the only reason I'm holding the bow is to keep it from falling out of my hand.
Exactly.
The second part of that, though, is I have seen people that, and I did it myself when I was just starting, was I found that sometimes I was closing my hand in anticipation of the shot. So I was actually closing my hand before the shot. So I would tell them, all right, put your hand out, and then, close your fingers in just a light, loose curl, then take your shot. Make that a deliberate action so that you're not death gripping the bow, but you've got just enough fingers around the bow so you don't feel like you're going to drop it.
One of the other things that I've seen that when people really do that really hard is that they go and they take their left arm, and instead of keeping it kind of relaxed and at a slight angle, they really conk that arm, and they get that arm bruise all the time. And
yeah.
Instead of having just a small little leather strap, they have it all the way up because it really digs in close to the elbow, which I find amazing. I actually don't use a leather one at all because I have a good form where I don't extend my arm, and I maybe get hit once, maybe twice for an entire day of shooting, which isn't too bad. But yeah, if I see people just going like this, and of course, one of the other things that people need to understand, and I know you know it, the sound from a release or the sound of it hitting your leather arm guard, it's like, okay, that's bad form because it should not be doing that all the time or making a twangy sound because, the person's releasing from the bottom fingers at the very last instead of releasing all fingers at one time, or doing a top finger, and they're like, man, I don't know why my finger feels like it's about ready to explode. Well, because you're putting everything on one finger. And so you need to create the balance, and that comes back with form and everything like that. So it's nice because it's like a lot of this is just very, I don't want to say common knowledge, but you've been doing it enough where from what you're saying and what I'm saying, the difference is so little from how we've done it and how we see it and how we teach it, because there really is not much of a difference. There might be just a bit of a style difference, but the actual physics of it is identical. So that's why it's nice when it's like, heard a twang, and it's like, oh, bet you that arrow went way out, didn't it? Yeah, how'd you know? It's because
I can hear it.
Yeah, the twang meant that the bottom released before the top. So now that arrow is just like, ooh, way out there. Now this one is the one that I tell people about, and it seems to be the hardest one for them to adjust to, because for everyone, this is always seems to be the hardest thing to finally get comfortable with. So say for example, you have this.
Hmm.
Now, in your mind, what's the issue with that? What's the problem?
Again, usually I'm going to look at their form, and depending upon what they were doing there, I would look at are they compensating? Did they take a high shot? Did they then do a low shot? Did they then take a high shot? What are they doing there different on each release to wind up more or less right on the left and right, but wind up and down on their shots?
For me, if I see a couple up, a couple down, to me that is always a release issue, because at that point from here they're like okay, and then they're releasing and they're bringing it forward a little bit so the arrows plummet, yeah. Or they go from here and then all of a sudden they do a nice little jerk back and then release, which is going to carry. And people don't realize that just that little bit, that quarter of an inch, is going to move it 4 inches off target.
Right.
So to me, if it's always high and low, I always tell people that's your release. You need to get in there, get into that stance, and just at that point, once you're there, don't even look at it. Don't think about the arm. Don't think about the next arrow. Just go, okay, here, and same release. Just think about this area right here and go, same release. Same release.
And prior to that, I mean, part of the same thing, but I look at what are they using as their anchor point? And if their anchor point is moving around, particularly beginners, yeah. They're under the cheek, they're under the, they're at the corner of the mouth, they're underneath the chin, or they draw a little further back or they draw a little farther forward. I'm like, all right, find that anchor point, find that one place you're always going to come to, and then go from there. You've got to have a consistent anchor point before you can develop consistency and figure out where your aim is.
The other thing that I've seen that's been the major issue for a lot of people is they're not consistent with the length of their arrow. They go and they're like, well, I tried a 29 and a half, and then I tried a 31, and then I tried a 30 and a half. It's like, oh my gosh. Just find one length and stick with it, because that half an inch can change a full half target form totally different. And they just need to find a good set of arrows at the right length. And once that is that, they really need to understand this is what you need to focus on. Once they get really good, then they can say, all right, I'm now shooting with arrows that are 1 inch shorter. 1 inch shorter arrows, the mathematical calculations for correctness at that point is that I need to adjust 3 target forms up at 20 yards, 5 target forms up at 30, and a full target form up at 40. And then at that point, then they can start, once they're comfortable with their form, their stance, their concept, then they can start using the calculations to adjust and make the corrections for the stuff, which at that point, and I'm not trying to make it sound like it is like the mathematical greatness, but when you can get to that level where you can start correcting for different arrows or the weights or spine of different arrows, and you're like, okay, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this, you are actually a very good archer. Because at that point, you have the capabilities, you have the confidence, you know what you need to do. All right, I need to do this. All right, I can't shoot these arrows because they are way too thin and my bow is going to shatter. So I can not use these at all, and I'll use these. All right, these tips are really good, but I know that they came from this company, and that means that the glue is really crappy. So at that point, I'll tell the people who have these arrows, hey, just let you know, you might have a tendency the nocks and the tip head will come off because the glue quality that this company uses is not very good. If you do use this instead. Hopefully they can fix their own arrows. But yeah, when you get to that level where it's mathematically changing how you can do it and still become a very good shot, that is when people, you're like, hey, you can do all this. This is great. You know what? I'm going to put you in for a grant level award because this is great. Now you can teach people your skill and how you can do this. What I tell people is after I teach them, these are the major issues and all this stuff. What I do is I teach them the natural respiratory pause method, but I go and I teach them, okay, this is the issue because of breathing. This is the issue because of stance. This is the issue because of grip. Now, I'm going to show you what I do with a natural respiratory pause to go from the beginning all the way through the completion of a shot to the point that it's very consistent. You can adapt little things. So for a natural respiratory pause, and especially in even in shooting rifle and pistol and everything, they always have the normal aspects of breathing and heart rate. The more your heart is beating, the more mentally you're going to, okay, I have to think real fast, da 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 da, and you want to slow down. So you want to have a slower heart rate so you can, because if your heart rate's beating really fast, you have a tendency of actually having what's known as the jitters.
Right.
So you always want to relax. I always tell people what you should do is first you get into your stance, then you look at your target, knock the arrow, look at the target and go, inhale, exhale. That's my target. That's what I'm looking at. Then I go inhale again. And when I inhale, the body's natural reaction to inhale is to expand the chest cavity. What that does is it allows easier drawing instead of like trying to use total 100% muscle and sometimes going against chest expansion. So if you're trying to exhale but trying to pull out, you're actually pushing muscles in and trying to extend out, which causes muscle fatigue and a little bit of confliction. So if you inhale, do the draw, exhale as you're bringing down, then what you're doing is the natural respiratory pause is where after you exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you have 1 to 5 seconds where you're not inhaling, you're not exhaling. You have a natural pause where your body's not having to inhale. And at that point, that is when you're not inhaling, which changes this. So you're always at a natural stance and you're causing focus. And between the 3 to 5 seconds is when I tell everyone, that is when, okay, I got it. Now focusing on my release and release. Mm-hmm. Keeping my arm out and not turning, not jittering. Now, some people can do the release from an inhale. That takes some practice and technique. But I tell people that if you can do that, that's fine. Because that's the way that you want to do it. And I'm not saying my way is the right way. But I'm going to show you where some issues can come into play. So I go, okay, so if you're there and you're like, and you inhale, you're intentionally holding it. It's not a natural thing. And once you start holding it, your heart rate starts to increase in pace. Right. And at which point, once that happens, that's when the little jittery stuff starts to happen. And once you have an inhaled chest, it becomes unstable.
Mhm.
But when you're exhaled, you're not fighting anything. You're not creating an imbalance or anything like that. So that's when after I explain everything to everyone and I show them that this is how I do it, I still have a bad release. I still have, man, that wind gust just, at that point, it becomes psychological. After you shoot the arrow, you're like, you know what? I was a bad release and I got to fix that. Okay, the wind took that one. I can't do anything about it. And you understand that this is what the issue was. You don't correct it for the next one. You're like, oh man, my release is bad, so I need, no. The fix is go back to your normal stance again and release. Forget about that arrow. Get that mental, I hate that arrow. It's always one arrow and it bothers me. I got to get it out of my brain, because if not, it's going to affect you and it's going to affect the next shot. And that's where people have to, and the way you said, the first thing you do is stance in form is so correct, because one of the things I do is I teach people, you have to understand that once you get into your stance, everything from the waist up is pretty much just a balancing platform that you're just trying to do. And I have people sit on a chair and shoot so that they are not like, and I'm sure you've seen this too, where people are like, they're like this, and then they're like, and it's like, okay, if you want to shoot a rabbit, that's fine. That's a great, I'm going to shoot that arrow into the dirt. But you have to understand that you're trying to get this means that you really need to change your actual form, so you're not changing your body stance to try and get it, because it's like, okay, this is, okay, yeah, this is it, this is the great, that's horrible form. Okay, you might be, so that's why you need the form and the stance first. Totally 100% on board with that. And that's why, as you said, it doesn't matter where the arrows go. Let's work on your form. Let's get your stance. Let's get where you feel comfortable. And then at that point, now we're going to fix this one little thing for the next couple of weeks, couple of months. Let's fix this now. And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, okay. Then it becomes either muscle memory where they don't have to think about it, or they're much more relaxed and they're like, oh man, 5 months ago, I was terrible and I'm doing pretty good right now. Yeah, it takes time. And trying to teach someone who's 38 how to shoot, who gets very frustrated because, man, I should be doing better than this. No, it takes time, like anything.
Yeah, because you're fighting it.
Exactly. What are some other interesting tricks that you have seen that really helps?
Other tricks that I have seen, that's a good question. Baron Cullum teaches a technique, and one of the things that he focuses upon is the hook on the string and the amount of tension that you have in the fingers. And so he has a little tool that he practices with that starts from the elbow and goes to the string. And he teaches people to not think about the fingers on the release, but about the elbow. So when you're pulling back, you're not thinking to yourself, I'm opening my hand. Instead, you're thinking about, I'm pulling free from the string. You're not even thinking about the fingers. You're just slipping free. And I do that when I'm teaching my beginners, is like, look, don't think about that hand opening, because that's not what you're doing. What you're doing is you're just extending the draw and slipping free from the string. So get their mind on the elbow so they're not thinking about the fingers, and make them not think about opening the hand.
I see, I mean, I've seen that several times, and it's a great technique. I see that many people have a problem with, I want to say, finger strength, because they believe, oh, my fingers really aren't that strong. So as soon as I go, I need to release my fingers forward. And I'm like, no, because when you're pulling back, it's the same thing. You're just keeping the string in the same spot. You're just bringing it back and opening your fingers instead of, well, I have to release it forward. That's when the poundage drops and the arrow drops several.
Right.
One thing that I did that a lot of people are like, I don't really understand it until they did it, is I would take, like, in front of the target, all right, they're always looking at the target, figuring this, okay, I need to do this, this, this. And then I go and I take a blank piece of paper and I say, okay, I want you to just figure out where your aiming point is, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then I would take a blank piece of paper at 10 yards and put it in front of the target. And I say, okay, now where would you be aiming at? Well, right here. So I put a little sticker right there. And I'm like, don't even look at the target. The arrow's going to hit the target. I want you to just keep aiming where you think the target is. And I want you to see, once the arrow goes through that paper, is it really in like all this small little quarter-sized opening, or are you jumping around because you can't find a target? And people are like, I have to see a target. No, you don't have to see a target. Once you get into the form and this is what it is, you should be going, this is the stance, this is the form, this is the place, this is the release. And it's not like you have to have a target. And people were like, that it was kind of like a weird thing to them, because they're like, that just doesn't make any sense, that we're not actually aiming at something. No, you still have an aim, but you have your, all right, I'm here, and then I would normally be aiming right here. Okay, then shoot. Okay. And have them know that you have to trust your muscle memory. You have to trust your form, not trust the target. And yeah, it was like, it's like, what? This. But little tricks like that really can help some people, and some people are like, this is just stupid. Like, okay.
I like exercises for that anyway, because you get archers who go up and they shoot the 20 yard, and they shoot the 20 yard, and they shoot the 20 yard, and then maybe they'll shoot the 30, or maybe they'll shoot the 40, but they get used to shooting at fixed distances. And so when you start putting 3D targets in front of them, and you start changing up the distances, you force them to stop, force them to stop shooting on reflex, and to think about, all right, well, now I need to adjust. What do I need to adjust to make this shot? Still using all the right form and technique, but get them out of the habit of thinking, well, this is exactly where I shoot. Because if they go to a different range, it might be slightly different elevation, or it could be, slightly different lighting conditions. And so you got to get people used to being conscious of, how do I adjust my aim?
Very much so. It is. It's like people will, as you said, will get comfortable with one. Usually it's the 20 meter, and then they'll shoot at the 30, and then they might shoot twice at the 40, and they're like, oh, I hate the 40. It's like, you don't hate the 40, you just don't do it enough. So you just need to shoot more at the 40, and
Right.
then at that point start shooting at the 30, and then at the 20 again, and you'd be like, okay, I'm pretty good at the 40. Okay, back at 30, and 20 is like, wow, this is so easy now. Oh yeah, because you've already ingrained that aspect so much. And now the fact that you're mentally working on something new is developing your mind and your body and your skill again, that once it gets to that level, going back down to here is like, oh, it's like second grade. Man, second grade is so easy compared to fifth grade. So
Mhm.
the other thing that I do sometimes is I tell people, okay, once you're ready and you're about ready to shoot, close your eyes and just think about your release. Of course, some people are okay with it, but most people at that point get so scared they're like, ah, and they'll do a lot of tensing and the arrow goes crazy. But that one doesn't really work too well with very many people, but I thoroughly enjoy it because you have to limit yourself on what you want to do to kind of figure out how to get yourself better in a different level. And some people don't really get that, or they don't want to get that. They're like, I'm just really happy with where I'm at. And that's fine. But different things work well for different people.
One of the things I do with beginners is, I mean, I'll try to quickly introduce them to concepts, the form, the stance, the technique, where the hands are, where the anchor point is, but then I remind them that's a lot of detail. That's a lot of things to remember on your shot cycle. So focus on one thing. Focus upon your bow hand. Focus upon your anchor point, and do that for 3, 6 shots. And don't worry about anything else. Just worry about those things. So as you're practicing, pick one thing to practice, and then next time pick something different to practice. Where is your elbow? Where is your bow shoulder? And so then it becomes a checklist that you can do much more quickly in time. Is where's my bow hand? Where's my elbow? Where's my shoulder? Where's my anchor point? Where is my draw elbow? Focus on one thing so that it becomes reflexive when they start doing it as a sequence.
No, that's good because people have to, people naturally can only really not just remember, but really concentrate and learn on one thing at a time. And that's exactly, you hit it right on the head. Let's practice on this one thing. Even if we just practice it all day, or if we're going to practice this for this next month to really get you comfortable, and then we'll go to the next thing that needs to be worked on. Or maybe after they're like, okay, I finally get this. Hey, I understand now why my release feels weird. Oh, well, there you go. See, you understand now from this, the secondary effects or a peripheral aspect. And that's good because when someone can not really learn on their own, but understand why because of something else, they're like, oh, I understand now why you were saying this, because once I went back home and I was like, I just don't, oh, I get it now. That's the point that we always try, at least as a teacher. When they get to that level, they're learning on their own. They're understanding. They're seeing things that finally click. I always call it, the heavens open up, beam of light comes down, God goes, no, and you're like, I feel like an idiot now. I totally get it. But those are great moments, and it should always be encouraged on people. So, yeah, this is, I always, real quickly. So yeah, this is like the rhythm for the natural respiratory pause. And this is what I pretty much try and tell everyone, that once you can get to pretty much this level, just as a basic understanding, your capabilities of shooting, form, a natural rhythm of shooting just totally changes. So at that point, a lot of people stop getting frustrated. And that's the hardest time, is when they're shooting, at least for me, what I see, when people get frustrated shooting, they're like, oh, you got to relax. Okay, we'll work on it. There was one lady that I was working with. She was so excited, just learned a lot in a very short period of time. And then she goes to her first event, and she is on the line, and there was, I think we had 20 people on a line at a time shooting, and there was about 65 people shooting altogether. And she did fine, but the thing was, she had been practicing with just her, me, and like one other person, and not 20 people on a line. And all of a sudden, all this noise and all this, and someone right next to her, and the person next to her was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe, this wind is on." And she's like, "This lady's bothering me." And I'm like, "It happens. You have to figure it out." So it totally frustrated her really bad. So the next time we went to fighters practice, I was like, she was shooting and I'm just behind her. "So, how's it going? You think you're aiming right? You know what? I don't know if you're aiming right, because if you're not aiming right, I'm going to beat." And she's like, "This is bothering me." I said, "That's why I'm doing it, to the point that you can ignore it, or at least go, this, I am just in my Zen mode and I'm not going to let it bother me." So different things will affect different people. And those are just the, like we said, the one thing that we need to work on for the next several practices, and everything's good. All right. I think this has been a great class. I greatly thank you for showing up and helping me validate that what I'm saying is is true.
And thank you. I think it was a great class. I was hoping there would be more people here, but it was a great class. And there were a couple of points there that I'm going to go back and look at the way that I teach and remember to focus on those, like the breath cycle. I like that. And I'm going to emphasize that a little with a couple of the archers that I'm working with right now, in fact.
That's wonderful news. I'm glad you showed up, and hope you can get a whole bunch more people going in this next several months of this pandemic phase, to get people out and about and try new things, because this is a great opportunity. And thank you very much for adding to this wonderful class.
And thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you have a great evening. And if you do this again, I'll try to be here again.
Perfect. All right. Thank you.
Good night.